Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the WEPT Cable 36 studios. At this time, I'm with a candidate for the county legislator, incumbent candidate, I might add, Mr. Darrel Paquin. He represents County Legislative District number 21, and here in Massena, that's voting districts 1, 2, 7, 8, and 9. Good day, Darrel, and thank you for coming in. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Gary. Glad to be here.
I've known you for a long time. Our kids played hockey together.
That's for sure.
My God, it seems like a long road that we've been down. For all of our viewers' information, can you give us a little bit of a background and tell us about the work on the committees that you do in the county?
Well, of course, I'm a first-term legislator. I was elected to the board in 1989, began my term in 1990. Since then, I've served on several different committees. As a first-term legislator, I was very proud of the fact that our chairman, Betty Bradley, appointed me to the Finance Committee. That's highly unusual for a first-term legislator to be appointed to such a committee. Also at that time, I served on the Legislative and Judicial Committee and the Personnel Committee. Since, of course, the issue with the solid waste, the county created a solid waste committee, and I've served as chairman of that committee ever since it was formed. I'm also chairman of the SWATA board. That's a 9-member board that oversees the private authority. I'm also a member of the governing board for the Dank landfill. Also, there are a couple of other committees that I've served on. I served on the health committee, and I also served on the legislative and judicial committee. As a matter of fact, I'm presently a member of that committee.
Probably, Darrel, the biggest issue that you're identified with, and probably been the guy that's been hit on the most over it, is the solid waste situation in the county. Can you give us a brief update on where it was, what happened, and a little bit of the future on where you think we're going?
Okay. I think that's what I'd like to concentrate on, Gary. I don't want to really get into the pros and cons of the incinerator.
Right.
I think that's been debated long enough. People have seen the numbers of what the cost of the incinerator would have been. And there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we made the right decision in voting down that incinerator. There simply was not enough waste in St. Lawrence County to be able to support that. As you know, an incinerator, part of the costs are paid for by the electricity revenues. That's directly related to the amount of waste that we have. Our consultants 3 years ago had projected we would have 80,000 tons of garbage this year to go into that incinerator. Just to give you an idea of exactly what we do have, we presently have built into our budget only 50,000 tons of waste. So there's a 30,000 ton shortfall in just 3 years, and you can imagine the impact that would have had, not only in the loss of electricity revenues, but also in the loss of tipping fee revenues that would have had to been covered by somebody else.
Exactly.
I think rather what I'd like to focus on today is to tell people exactly what has been accomplished over the past 3 years, where we are now, what our plans are for the future. Once the incinerator was voted down, and I was appointed to the authority board, and Tom Plastino was named as executive director, we made a decision at that time that we were going to start making plans for 1993, which was the year when we expected our landfills would be closed. So at that time, we raised the tipping fees to an appropriate level. We made the decision that we would not go out and bond any more money until we were ready to actually go out and build a landfill. Over the past 3 years, our total costs have actually been $9.5 million less than what we would have been paying with that incinerator. And during that time, we've closed the Ogdensburg landfill and the Canton landfill.
Right.
We have enough money set aside in our reserves to finish closing the Massena landfill next year. We brought a recycling system online. Presently our plans are Very shortly, we will be contracting with Oneida Herkimer County to process our recyclables. We've gone out, we've bought all of our tractors and trailers and our hauling equipment that we're going to be needing to do our hauling operations. We're presently collecting leachate and testing the groundwater at the present landfills. As you know, one of the requirements is we have to monitor those landfills.
Right, that's right.
For the future. And in addition to that, as I said, we have not taken on any more capital costs. As a matter of fact, we went through the whole process of siting a landfill. Now, I know there are a lot of critics out there saying that we wasted money in siting that landfill, but I think one thing people have to keep in mind is at the time the incinerator was voted down, dank was not an option. Our option at that time was to go forward with the siting process for a new landfill. As a matter of fact, if we had not done that, there is no doubt whatsoever the DEC would have come in and closed our landfills prior to this year, and we would have been exporting at that time. Give people an idea of what that means. It has cost us, on the average, about $400,000 a year over the past 3 years to operate those landfills. It would have been costing us $3.5 million a year to be exporting. So what we've done during that time, as I mentioned earlier, is we've put the capital portion of the system together. The landfills are closed, and we haven't had to go out and borrow any money. We've built 2 new transfer stations, one in Ogdensburg and one in Massena.
Yeah.
And we did that without having to borrow any money. So the system is intact. As a matter of fact, we have enough money in our reserves right now that by putting that money aside and allowing it to earn interest, we will be able to pay off half of the present debt, the money that was borrowed back in 1987 and 1988. So 4 or 5 years from now, we're going to have a system up and running where we aren't going to have nearly the debt we would have had with the incinerator. If you recall, we already had $8 million worth of debt. It would have been an additional $44 million worth of debt with the incinerator and the ash landfill that had to be built for that. We are presently, as I said, we started October 1st trucking our garbage down to Rodman. Now, a lot of people are trying to portray that as only a temporary solution or a Band-Aid solution. We've got 40 years of capacity down there. To give people an idea of the financial position that we're in, Dank presently obviously has bonds, and part of our $53 a ton tipping fee is used to pay those bonds off. Those bonds are for 20 years. So that means in 20 years, we're no longer going to have that debt service. So for the additional 20 years that we have beyond that, we can be setting money aside to build up a fund to either go out and find a new site for a landfill, or there's a very, very strong possibility because of the amount of buffer land that we have around the landfill in Rodman that
site.
We could simply, we've got all the support buildings there, the roadways are coming in, the way stations are there. Common sense would only dictate that what we would do is simply go out, take some more land and build additional cells.
And just expand it.
Just expand it. So there's capacity there for well beyond 40 years. And as I said, I think something else to keep in mind too, we just had our SWATA board meeting last week. We set our budget up for next year, and we kept the tipping fee at $125 a ton. That's 3 years in a row that we haven't had to raise our tipping fee, and in 4 or 5 years, by being able to pay off half of the debt that we do owe, obviously our costs are going to be going down. So we're in excellent financial shape despite of what a lot of people are trying to portray.
Right. An issue that's been getting a lot of press and attention lately is the public defender and the assigned counsel program. What are they, Darrel? What are those two programs?
Okay, some people are offering a lot of criticism over the public defender program. I think what people need to understand, and I'm afraid the three opponents here in Massena, the three Republican candidates for the legislature, simply don't understand that system, and they don't understand how the judicial system works. The county is responsible for defending people not only who are accused of in criminal cases, but also in family court. That's an area that the district attorney's office is not responsible for at all. Anytime a person commits a crime, and obviously they are charged or brought before a judge and arraigned and so forth, the judge, of course, tells them that if they can't afford an attorney, one will be appointed for them. It's no secret there's a strong correlation between crime and poverty and so forth. Nearly 90% of the criminal cases, for example, that occur in this county are those that are committed by, quote, indigent defendants. So the county has to, by state law, we have to provide an attorney for them. Now, we have actually a two-part system, and we need to have a two-part system. Every other county has the same thing. We have a public defender's office, which is composed of 5 attorneys. They handle a majority of the cases that are where we have to defend people accused of crimes. We also have to have a panel of private attorneys who are assigned to criminals in cases where there is a conflict. Okay, let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Although this is a highly unusual case. If people recall a little while ago with the Casablanca case in Governor.
Yes.
When those 5 individuals were accused of the crime and so forth, if you recall on TV, I remember very vividly when the 5 defendants were marched into court.
Right.
Not only did you have 5 defendants, each of those defendants, by law, has to have a separate attorney. And that attorney has to come from a separate office, okay? Very often what happens when a crime is committed, especially some of the more major crimes, the felonies, it isn't committed by just one person. It's usually 2 or 3 people that go out and commit the crime. They may go out and rob a gas station or break into a store, whatever the case might be. Well, you know as well as I do, what usually ends up happening is once they're accused, one of them will probably start singing like a canary, and he'll offer a deal. So consequently, you have to provide a separate attorney for each of them.
For each one of them, right.
Because our public defender's office is technically one attorney's office, they can only defend one of those 3 defendants. We must go out and hire a private attorney to defend the other 2. So there you have a case where it only takes one prosecutor to prosecute the case, but the county must pay for a public defender and 2 separate private attorneys from 2 separate offices to defend those 3 people.
The people, right.
I personally don't approve of the idea, but that's by state law. Now, a couple of years ago, we were very emphatic about the fact that in the process of setting up the public defender's office, we knew that for the first couple of 3 years that we were probably going to see an increase in our cost. Because very, very often what happens is a case can sometimes take 1 or 2 years before it's finally settled. Now, you already had cases from 1991 and 1990 that were being handled by private attorneys that weren't going to be settled until 92 or 93. So what ended up happening is as those cases which were actually assigned in 1990 and 1991 were finally settled in 92 and 93, the attorneys were then turning in their vouchers to pay, to pay for those cases. What we have found over the past couple of years, and it only makes sense. For example, it used to be years ago in a local court such as Massena. Massena happens to be one of the busiest courts. If you had 10 different defendants appearing before the judge on a particular day, you had to have 10 separate attorneys for each of those. Now, unless of course there's a conflict, we can send one public defender down here to to handle those 10 cases. Those 10 cases.
Yeah.
Just the the economics alone simply makes sense to do that. There are problems with the way the public defender's office has been set up, and I didn't agree with this at the time, and I still don't agree with this. That basically, what happened is there was a strong lobbying effort by private attorneys who were being paid before as assigned counsel attorneys. They realized that they weren't going to be getting as many cases. Consequently, they weren't going to be earning as much money. Right now, the system is set up so that we have to give them half of the felony cases. My feeling is we should only be sending out those cases where there is an obvious conflict. If there isn't a conflict, it should be kept within the public defender's office. We're presently paying another attorney, the assigned counsel administrator, we're paying him approximately $20 a case simply to either make a phone call or write a letter to another attorney telling him he's assigned to a case. That's a duplication. We could very easily simply have the secretary in our public defender's office assign those cases. But that's part of the problem is we have to make a decision up there. If we're going to have a public defender's office, number one, we have to staff it to an appropriate level so that we can handle all of those cases that don't involve conflicts. And then those cases that do involve conflicts, we can assign those to private attorneys. Another big problem with the method that is used now, and I spoke about this at the debate last week, is right now the private attorneys are paid through what is known as a voucher system. They are paid, I believe it's $25 an hour for the time they spend out of court and $40 an hour for the time they spend in court. We have no idea what that cost is going to be until the attorney submits the voucher. Mm-hmm. My feeling is it should be set up on a contractual basis. I think we could very easily go out, for example, and contract with maybe 9 or 10 attorneys and assign those conflict cases on a rotational basis and agree to pay them X number of dollars a year. I can't put a figure to it. I think it's something we'd have to sit down and negotiate with them. Either that or pay them on a per case basis. We're going to pay you so much money for a misdemeanor crime. We're going to pay you so much money for a felony case. We're going to pay you so much money for a family court case, so that we have an idea of what those costs are going to be as the cases come back in. So, and those are some areas we need to look at. There's no doubt about that.
Still on the public defender assigned counsel area, probably the hot question right now. In your judgment, Darrel, are we spending more money to defend people than we are to prosecute them?
Again, that's very misleading. I know my opponent showed a chart on the number of cases, for example, that the district attorney has, and so forth. I think in order for people to understand what's happening, you have to look at the historical costs. Any county, whether it be St. Lawrence County, Franklin County, Jefferson County, whatever, always has to pay more money for the program for indigent defendants than for the district attorney's office. It's not because of a matter of showing favoritism or whatever. It's simply the way the judicial system works. Let me explain. For example, right now 1/3 of our costs for the public defender and assigned counsel attorneys, 1/3 of our total costs deals with those cases involving family court cases. Cases where there is a dispute between the husband and wife, maybe over a custody situation,
Right,
visitation rights, whatever the case might be. Very often what ends up happening in family court, both of them are indigent, in other words, too poor, so we have to defend the husband and provide an attorney for
the wife. Yeah.
And not only that, very often there's a child involved. He has to be provided with a separate attorney also. Now, actually, that is what is known as a guardian type of situation, and there's the state provides for the cost for the representation of the child. But the district attorney's office is never involved in family court cases. He never enters into that at all. As I said, it usually involves a situation where you've got an attorney for the husband and an attorney for the wife competing against each other, and we're picking up the costs of both of that. Mm-hmm. Another area where we have costs that the district attorney's office doesn't have costs, as you know, I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, there are 3 prisons in St. Lawrence County. Very often those prisoners, of course, they apply for parole. If that parole is denied by the parole board, they have a right to appeal that decision.
Which requires counsel.
Requires an attorney, and the county is responsible for paying for that. Personally, I think that's unfair. Those are state prisons. The state should be paying for the counsel for that. But again, there's another typical example of costs that I think are being shoved down the county's throat from the state level. The district attorney's office is not involved in parole appeals. He doesn't enter into that situation at all. Mm-hmm. All right, now, so let's get into the criminal cases, because that's where the district attorney's office is involved. And of course, you also have public defenders and assigned counsel attorneys involved. Now, I just explained the situation of very often what happens with cases in the local courts, what are known as the judicial courts. Right now, just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, there are 32 towns in St. Lawrence County. Each of those towns has their own separate town court. They meet on different days, different nights, whatever the case might be. There are also, I believe, 10 or 12 village courts, which also meet on separate days. And there's also a city court in the city of Ogdensburg. Okay. So, there's close to 45 different courts just dealing with misdemeanors, traffic violations, and so forth. Now, what happens in those minor courts, because they usually involve a minor infraction, a misdemeanor, a traffic ticket, violation, whatever the case might be, most of those end up getting plea bargained anyway. Matter of fact, I've heard figures that close to 90% of all misdemeanor cases and traffic tickets and minor violations end up being plea bargained. Now, what does that mean? That means the district attorney, a prosecutor, never even has to come down to any one of those courts. That decision is made by him. He looks at at the record, how serious is the crime, what is the defendant's previous record, and so forth. He makes a decision on whether or not that charge can be reduced, and that can all be done by either the district attorney himself or the assistants. However, when you look at from the defense side, take a typical misdemeanor. When that defendant appears before the judge the first time, when he's first charged or arraigned, he's given the option of having the county provide an attorney for him. He fills out basically an application that shows what his income is. If his income is below a certain level, he is either given the services of a public defender or a private attorney that is assigned. Very often, before a misdemeanor is even settled at the local level, it involves as many as 4 or 5 trips back to court from the time that defendant has been arraigned to the time he is finally sentenced. Every single time he appears before the judge, a defense attorney must be standing there beside him. That's by state law. So just the physical time being spent in all those local courts can give you an idea of the amount that it costs, the county to defend those cases. Now let's look at it, from the county court, the more serious crimes, the felony cases and so forth. Very often, felony cases even get settled out of court. They're plea bargained.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
District attorney does not have to actually spend a lot of time with the felony cases unless it goes to trial. Right? But if he's going to trial and you've got, say, 3 defendants with 3 attorneys, they're spending time doing the necessary paperwork, filing motions and so forth, and spending time in trial also. So it's just by nature of the judicial system and the fact that very often there are conflict cases, there are cases in family court, that's the reason why it's costing us more for our program for indigent defendants than it is for prosecuting those cases.
Well, there's a lot to that issue with public defender.
There is.
Assigned counsel.
And I'll be honest with
It
you.
was enlightening just hearing some of that. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you. When I first went on the county board, I was somewhat surprised at what actually is involved in defending people.
Yeah.
For example, although I'd seen it, we all watch, of course, the Perry Mason shows
sure.
on TV and so forth. But every time there was always only one defendant, and it does make sense that very often when you read in the paper, you see 2 or 3 or even 4 people accused of a crime,
Right.
and the fact that each of them has to be provided with a separate attorney.
Yeah. Well, like you said, with that Casablanca 5, and then that big case down in Watertown with the young men and the murder of that girl, each one, and that went on for years. So
each one.
before we close, Darrel, how about taking a look into your crystal ball? What do you see in the future for St. Lawrence County?
Well, there's certainly no doubt that people in the county, the taxpayers, not only individual property owners, businesses, industry, and so forth, they're becoming very, very concerned about the cost of government. I think we need to take a serious look at the county level. There are several areas that we have absolutely no control over. For example, in our budget for next year, we have a $1 million increase alone just in local Medicaid costs. Okay, those costs have to be paid for either out of property taxes, sales taxes, whatever the case might be. Another program that counties are becoming more and more responsible for is the early care program for young children. That's a program that was instituted by the state. When it was originally instituted, that program was supposed to eventually be paid for by state funding. The state simply has refused to help pick up some of the costs there. What has happened is because we have been forced to pay for a lot of these state-mandated programs, we've had, and in order to pay for those and not see drastic increases in property taxes and so forth, we've got to be able to take a serious look at some of the local services we're offering. We have to look at ways of perhaps combining departments. For example, right now, one of the things that we're looking at, and it makes sense if you think about it, the solid waste issue. We're no longer going to be operating our own landfill. Right? Our solid waste department right now basically is going to involve operating 4 transfer stations. Okay, one of those is only open 3 days a week, the one up in Star Lake, and running a trucking operation. It would seem to me common sense would dictate there's some way, somehow or other, either at the administrative end, the operational end, that we can find ways of combining that perhaps with our highway department to try to save some costs there. I think we've got to take a real tough, long, hard look at some of the programs that we're offering. If we're going to cut costs, it certainly is going to mean that we're going to have to probably look at maybe not filling some positions as people retire.
Right.
Are there ways that we can provide services more effectively? One of the for example, getting back to the public defender program, I talked about the large number of courts that we have to cover. I think there needs to be some cooperation between the county and the towns that could maybe help us reduce our costs there. A couple of years ago, I brought forth a proposal which basically would allow, and the smaller towns can do this. You can't do it in the larger towns like Massena and Ogdensburg and Potsdam and so forth. But several of the smaller towns have very, very few cases that ever appear. Well, rather than sending, say, a public defender or a private attorney to a small town on one night to maybe deal with just one case, and then the next night he has to go to an adjacent small town to deal with two cases. We are allowed by the state, the towns are allowed by the state to combine two courts into one. I think that's something that could be looked at. If we could, for example, reduce the number of those smaller courts that we have to deal with by 15 or 20, that would not only reduce our costs, it would reduce the cost for the smaller towns because they wouldn't be paying
Right.
to support individual courts on their own. We've got to look. I'm a firm believer in that. I think we've got to take a serious look at some of the programs that we're offering, looking at what are known as impact fees, and those. In other words, in solid waste is entirely supported by tipping fees. It pays for itself. Property taxes and sales taxes are not used for that. There are other areas where certain services are provided to people. We have to probably take a serious look at assessing a charge on some of those services. Anything we can do to lower the cost of government, something along those lines.
Yeah. Well, I can wholeheartedly agree with you there with a county budget that's just topped 100 million, slightly topped 100 million. I think we got to really take a hard look at
And
some of these issues that you brought up, and probably some other ones that we don't have enough time to discuss right now. Before we close, Darrell, would you like to say anything further, or is there something that you forgot that you would like to bring out at this time?
Well, it's just speaking to the voters in Massena. I think when you cast your ballot on November 2nd, you need to take a serious look at the candidates and ask yourself what do you feel they've done for you in the past 4 years. For example, a program I just want to very briefly mention. I'm very proud of this. Okay, I remember, I think it was 3 years ago. We offer a tax exemption. Matter of fact, many schools and villages and towns offer a tax exemption for senior citizens. At the time I went on the board, that tax exemption for low-income senior citizens was basically following what was known as the 50% rule. In other words, if their income was below a certain dollar amount, they received a 50% reduction in their county taxes. If their income was simply $1 above that dollar amount, they had to pay the full amount. And essentially what would happen if somebody, for example, saw an increase in their social services check, or Social Security check,
Sure.
that just slightly put them over that threshold, bang, all of a sudden their county taxes got doubled, and very often it would probably eat up the whole increase in their pension.
Sure.
So I came up with a system that's allowable by the state, whereby we now offer tax exemptions to low-income senior citizens that is based on a graduated scale. In other words, we start at a certain amount and they are offered a 50% reduction. Then we go in $600 increments, and as they move into each category, the reduction becomes 5% less. So they don't see that drastic, sharp increase all of a sudden. And I notice in the newspapers that several other towns and villages and school districts have followed along those lines, using this graduated method instead. But that's just one example of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I do feel I've tried to be fiscally responsible up there. For example, in last year's budget alone, I came up with ideas of ways that we could cut that budget by $150,000. And many of my colleagues agreed with me, and we were able to reduce property taxes, county property taxes, by $150,000. So I would hope those are some of the things that the citizens would be looking at. Who are the legislators that are actually trying to find new ideas, trying to find way to reduce costs, and still at the same time provide more cost-effective means of delivering those services
Right.
compared to what have other legislators done? What new programs have they come up with? Have they been the type of legislator who has simply sat back and let other people make decisions and constantly offered criticism, yet never at any time have they ever come up with any new fresh ideas themselves? I think that's the key thing that the voters need to look at.
Well, you've stood right on the firing line, I'll tell you.
Well,
Tooth
I
and
think
nail.
there's no doubt about the fact, the incinerator is a very controversial issue, and because I was involved in that as chairman of the committee, there's criticism involved.
Yeah.
It's a very, very controversial, very emotional
a touchy subject.
But I think, if anything, that I think that's something else voters need to look at. Who is not afraid to deal with the controversial issues?
That's right.
There are no easy solutions to a lot of the problems up there, and if you're going to make tough decisions, you're not going to please everybody all of the time. That's one thing I've found out, Gary.
Right. Well, I want to thank you very much for your time, for stopping into the studio. It's much
Well, I
appreciated.
thank you for having me here.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been talking with Mr. Darrel Paquin, County Legislator from District Number 1, and in Massena, that's voting Districts 1, 2, 7, 8, and 9. Mr. Paquin deserves your consideration. A week from this Tuesday, November the 2nd, it's Election Day. Thank you very much.